He found Hawthorne, a tree-lined residential street, and spotted the Maxey house immediately on the corner of Bryant Street, a two-story pink stucco intruder among all the standard wooden and brick houses in the neighborhood, as incongruous as an obese lady in a sunbathing suit plunked down in the middle of a convention of the women's clubs for modesty and abstinence. It tried to make up for its appearance with some young pine, ash, and eucalyptus trees in front, and was contained by a neatly trimmed hedge in front and on its other sides. A narrow driveway led to a single automobile shed on one side. Vines were beginning to crawl up all sides of the place. The front door at the top of some steps was a fearsome oaken barrier at the bottom of a short tower with a round lead-paned window on top. It practically invited a battering ram. Green and red terracotta ornamentation around the windows and at the roofline made it only look like a pound cake decorated with colored icing. A mailbox stood at the beginning of a flagstone walkway leading up to the oaken door. It said, 275 Hawthorne, Maxey. Skeen mentally dubbed the place Spanish Mongrel. All in all, he thought, the place looked a little too rich, even for a Stanford professor. He parked the roadster across the street from the house. A coupe with its top down sat in the shed, and a blue Packard sat in front. He ascended the steps and let an enormous brass knocker fall twice on a brass plaque. The afternoon sun warmed his back as he waited. The door opened without the groan he had expected it to make, and a short, dowdy-looking woman in a maid's uniform stared up at him. "Yes?" "Good afternoon. Is Professor Maxey at home?" The woman stared at him for a moment, then decided to ask, "Who may I say is calling?" "Cyrus Skeen. I'm here on business. He's expecting me." The woman frowned in thought, then stood aside. "Please wait here, sir." Skeen stepped inside, and the woman closed the door behind him. Skeen removed his trilby. The woman ambled off into an arcade furnished with a mixture of Victorian and Deco furniture, floor lamps, pictures, and some potted palms, and disappeared into one of the side doors. A series of Persian rugs led to the end of the arcade and some French doors, through which Skeen could see a backyard. A moment later, a tall, thin woman in pearls and knee-length black dress appeared and came down the arcade. She was a nice-looking woman in her 40s with coiffed hair and a finishing school poise. She frowned at him, too, however, and approached him as though she wasn't sure he was the bearer of bad news. "Yes, sir. Mr. Skeen, is it?" There was a hint of a British accent and a distinctly Massachusetts lilt. Maxey had said she had spent some time in England with her controversial father. Skeen nodded. Yes, and you are?" "Mrs. Maxey, I'm afraid my husband is lunching at the moment. May I help you?" "If you would be kind enough to interrupt him, please let him know that his check bounced." Skeen's brow wrinkled. Her voice was nearly the same as the one he had heard over the telephone yesterday, but he could not quite remember what it had sounded like. "Excuse me?" "The check he paid me with was drawn on an imaginary account." "I don't understand that," said the woman, shaking her head and anger beginning to rise in her voice. "What is your profession, Mr. Skeen?" "Private detective. I was hired by your husband yesterday to look into a matter." Mrs. Maxey now looked very distressed. "Please wait here for a moment." She turned and disappeared back down the arcade. Another moment passed. Skeen twirled the trilby on a finger and whistled soundlessly. Mrs. Maxey came out again in the company of a man who was a head shorter than she, a bald, rotund, cherubic fellow in a tweed jacket and a red bow tie. He scrutinized Skeen from behind steel-framed glasses with a frown and a look of astonishment. He raised a pudgy finger and whacked it at Skeen. "Aren't you that detective fellow from up in the city? I've seen your picture in the papers. I seem to remember your name. Weren't you the one who was in the middle of all that trouble with the Daedalus Society last July?" It was Skeen's turn to frown. "The very same, sir. And you are?" "I am Eugene Maxey, sir," said the man. "And I don't know you from Adam."